Hello, Year 3. So it's my turn to read The Train to Impossible Places again this week. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. I really am, so I'm glad it's my turn again. We're going to start on chapter 15 today, Homecoming. The Impossible Postal Express was only in the tunnel for a few minutes, but it was long enough for a change to come over Wilmot. His despondency gave way to a nervous energy, and he flitted restlessly around the HEC, checking his pocket watch every few seconds and peering out of the portholes with an almost hopeful expression. "It'll all be fine," said Susie, trying to reassure herself as much as him. "Almost there," he said, looking at his watch again. A few moments later, the train burst from the tunnel with a whoosh of air and a corona of dissipating magic, and immediately began to slow. "We're here," he said, and leapt to the nearest porthole. He waved her over, and she hurried to join him. Flat beige light washed into the cabin from a flat beige sky, punctuated here and there with columns of black smoke rising from formidable brick chimneys. A hodgepodge of industrial buildings rose beyond the tracks, warehouses, factories, mills, all built from the same dirty yellow bricks with coal-black slate roofs. Far beyond them, Susie could just make out the peaks of distant mountains, brown and lumpen and half hidden in the haze. The express was weaving through a broad ribbon of multiple rail lines, all of them intersecting and overlapping in a confusion of points and junctions. A few other trains hurried this way and that. Some of them were big and regal, pulling lines of carriages that seemed to stretch on without end, while others looked almost handmade, like garden sheds on wheels. She glanced at Wilmot, not sure whether he was expecting her to be impressed, but he was watching it all with a slight smile. "Where are we?" she prompted. "We're home," he said. "This is Trollville." The belle de wire slowed to a crawl, and she cut across the other lines, finally drawing the express into a clutch of sidings, lengths of dead-end track to one side of the main lines, on which a collection of goods trains were being serviced and unloaded. Wilmot had his hands on the release handle for the HEC door before the express had even come to a complete stop. "We've got to hurry," he said, leaping out. Susie followed him down onto a narrow platform between the express and a row of freight wagons and the neighbouring siding, barely wide enough for two people to pass each other. It was choked with dozens of trolls in work overalls, loading and unloading crates, and all jostling and shouting for space. Susie hugged herself and pressed in close to Wilmot to avoid being swept away. "There you are!" Stonker came striding along the platform towards them, the yellow bulk of Ursel close behind. Susie sensed Wilmot go rigid beside her. "I don't know how it happened, Mr. Stonker," he began, but the older troll silenced him with a look. "It doesn't matter how it happened. All that matters is how we deal with it. Can it be done quickly?" "Yes," said Wilmot. I think so. I've never had to—" "Then why are you both standing here?" Stonker's moustache bristled. "I want to be underway again in an hour." "Right," said Wilmot, who spun on his heels and grasped Susie by the elbow. "Let's go." Before she could speak, he had dug out along the platform, dragging her with him. "Where are we going?" she said, jostling beside Wilmot as they emerged from a siding into a small yard between warehouses. More trolls, most of them in hard hats and high visibility jackets, shuttled back and forth, stacking crates and pushing wheelbarrows loaded with equipment. They stopped to stare at Susie as she passed, and she couldn't help blushing, painfully self-conscious at the attention. There was no way to hide from it. She was half a metre taller than every troll that passed. "We are going to HQ," said Wilmot. She dug her heels in, bringing him to a halt. "HQ," she said, aghast. "They're the ones who want to scramble my memory." He gave her a pained smile. "Well, yes, but that was before I deputised you. You're part of the staff now." "But will they know that? Am I even allowed to be here?" The idea took hold. "Don't I need a visa or passport or something?" He seesawed from one foot to the other, not wanting to linger. "It's probably fine," he said, "but perhaps you'd better let me do the talking when we're there. I don't want you to get into any trouble." She pressed her lips together. As far as she could tell, she had got into nothing but trouble with Wilmot, but she didn't say anything, and followed him off as he set her to run again. "How is this helping us get to the ivory tower?" whispered Frederick from inside her pocket, but she pressed it shut until he took the hint and fell silent. Wilmot led her out of the courtyard to a narrow lined street with more warehouses. Half of them seemed to be empty, and Susie guessed that the area had seen better days, but the further they got from the goods yard, the cleaner and more orderly everything appeared, and the wider the streets became. Susie also started to notice bundles of glowing cables strung back and forth like washing lines between the upper floors of many of the buildings they passed. They looked a bit like telephone wires, except they were luminous white and pulsed with occasional flashes of light. She tried to ask Wilmot about them, but he was deaf to her questions, concentrating on leading her from one street to the next, until they finally stepped out into a broad boulevard lined with big regal buildings, that looked like banks or department stores. Trams jostled for space with motorised tricycles, and there were even things that looked a bit like cars, albeit cars assembled from random bits of scrap. One wobbled past that looked like two penny farthings welded to an old sofa, the seat hanging down between the enormous leading wheels, with a washing machine slung underneath for an engine. Horns blared, drivers shouted, pedestrians shouted back. But despite the noise, Susie could tell almost immediately that everything was under control. It sounded like chaos, it even looked like chaos, but every vehicle was travelling at the same steady speed, changing lanes in calm, fluid motions. No brakes squealed. When she really listened, she realised that none of the shouting was angry. It seemed almost excited. She didn't realise she'd spoken aloud until Wilmot replied, "Yes, it's always like this at rush hour," he said. "Everyone loves showing off what they've been working on." She looked at the throng of vehicles again with a new sense of respect. "You mean they made them themselves?" "Mostly." She couldn't suppress a grin. "They're incredible." He led her along the crowded pavements towards a large open square at the end. "We're trolls. We build things. It's what we do." She tried to ignore the heads that turned in her direction as she passed. "What about you? What do you build?" He paused for a second, then redoubled his speed, but he'd hesitated long enough for her to see him blushing. "I'm, not much of an engineer, I'm afraid. I've just never had the knack." He pressed on, not looking back, although the tips of his ears were still bright red with embarrassment. "I mean, engineering's very important, but it's not the only thing in life, is it?" "I never said it was." He looked back at her then with something like surprise. "Good," he said. "That's not a view many trolls take." They'd reached the square, one whole side of which was dominated by a building the size of a cathedral. Susie stared at it in wonder as they approached. It was built from blocks of stones as big as cars, and a row of soaring columns ran along its front, supporting a huge triangular lintel. The lintel was alive with elaborate carvings of trumpets and trains, rockets and trolls in postal uniforms, all radiating out from a crescent moon in the centre. Beneath this were the carved words, "Trollville Central Post Office." And I'm going to stop there, but I will just show you. There's not many pictures in this book, but there is a picture today of Trollville Central Post Office. So you can see the triangular shape at the top and the huge door. I wonder if they're going to go inside tomorrow. Right, I will see you tomorrow.